Well, good evening. This is Hound Dog Steve coming to you on the 10th of September, and I seem to have come down with a bit of a head cold, so you have to excuse me if I sound a little stuffed up. Anyway, I thought I'd bring you a little story, actually a couple of stories linked together, and they really tell a sorry tale about our society. Schools put play back in the playground. So I'm just going to read you part of this. This is a story about Chester Elementary School joined in a pilot project 3 years ago that encourages children to engage in creative and spontaneous play. So basically this is teaching children how to play again. And it says that when they first put the children out in the playground, they would stand around and hang around and they really wouldn't engage in free play. The head of this initiative is Raktim Mitra, an associate professor in the School of Urban and Regional Planning at Ryerson University, said research has shown that engaging in creative and spontaneous play is important for children's physical and mental well-being. The idea is that when your free time is more creative and more imaginative, then you can concentrate more on the structured elements of your day. Well, you know, we have known this forever as older parents, and of course, you know, for us, when we went out to school, I walked to school. It was about 1.5 miles, and of course the walk to school and the walk home from school was the most fun of the day, because you got to hang out with your buds, and there was usually a game of soccer, pick-up soccer on the way home. When we did finally get home, we'd grab supper, and parents fully expected their children to go out and play until the lights came on the street. They knew that basically we were in no danger, and you know, because kids were taught to take risks, they learned how to deal with that kind of stuff. And I just find it kind of interesting that 30 years later, like so many things in our universities, these professors come out with all these studies on how to school kids and how to fast track them in the educational sector, get them all prepped up for university and so on and so forth, and none of it works. So we're going back to the good old ways. We're going back to reading, writing and arithmetic in our classes, which means rote learning of times tables and that kind of stuff, emphasis on addition, subtraction, multiplication and division, which recently some high school teachers actually failed. They couldn't answer grade 6 and 7 math questions. Now that is absolutely abysmal. They had an example of the questions that were given. As far as I'm concerned, it was essentially mental arithmetic. But I find it's kind of interesting here. They say that, okay, kids are learning to take risks, Mr. Hume said. We don't want to deny them these learning opportunities. It's a different way of using the outside. Anyway, I just, as I say, I find it completely bizarre that we are now having to teach kids to do something that we just took for granted when we were kids. We had no problem entertaining ourselves, and in fact, if you didn't entertain yourselves and went home early, usually mom or dad had some chores ready for you to go. But this next story, which I'm going to flip over to the computer for, is absolutely staggering. It's down in America, and of course they do have a different style down there, but really, when I read you some of this stuff, you are going to be absolutely amazed. So let's take a little look at that. And here we are with Zero Hedge, Tyler Durnan, and it is the 8th of September. I really like the stories that Zero Hedge puts up. This is quite an interesting site. Criminalizing childhood. School safety measures aren't making students any safer. Every day in communities across the United States, children and adolescents spend the majority of their waking hours in schools that have increasingly come to resemble places of detention more than places of learning. From the metal detectors to drug tests, from increased policing to all-seeing electronic surveillance, the public schools of the 21st century reflect a society that has become fixated on crime, security and violence. This is investigative journalist Annette Fuentes. It used to be that if you talked back to a teacher or played a prank on a classmate or just failed to do your homework, you might find yourself in detention or doing an extra writing assignment after school. Of course, that was before school shootings became part of our national lexicon. Nowadays, as a result of the government's profit-driven campaign to keep the nation safe from drugs, weapons and terrorism, students are not only punished for minor transgressions such as playing cops and robbers on the playground, bringing Legos to school or having a food fight, but they are being punished with suspension, expulsion and even arrest. Criminalizing childhoods. Welcome to Compliance 101. The police state's primer in how to churn out compliant citizens and transform the nation's school into quasi-prisons through the use of surveillance cameras, metal detectors, police patrols, zero-tolerance policies, lockdowns, drug-sniffing dogs, strip searches and active shooter drills. If you're wondering, these police state tactics have not made the schools any safer. Rather, they have turned the schools into authoritarian microcosms of the police state, containing almost every aspect of the militarized, intolerant, senseless, over-criminalized, legalistic, surveillance-riddled, totalitarian landscape that plagues those of us on the outside. If your child is fortunate enough to survive his encounter with the public schools, you should count yourself fortunate. Most students are not so lucky. From the moment a child enters one of the nation's 98,000 public schools to the moment he or she graduates, they will be exposed to a steady diet of draconian zero-tolerance policies that criminalize childish behavior, overreaching anti-bullying statutes that criminalize speech. School resource officers, police, tasked with disciplining and or arresting so-called disorderly students, standardized testing that emphasize rote answers over critical thinking, politically correct mindsets that teach young people to censor themselves and those around them, and extensive biometric and surveillance systems that, coupled with the rest, acclimate young people to a world in which they have no freedom of thought, speech or movement. By the time the average young person in America finishes their public school education, nearly 1 out of every 3 of them will have been arrested. More than 3 million students are suspended or expelled from schools each year, often for minor misbehavior such as disruptive behavior or insubordination. Black students are 3 times more likely than white students to face suspension and expulsion. Zero-tolerance policies that were intended to make schools safer by discouraging the use of actual drugs and weapons by students have turned students into suspects to be treated as criminals by school officials and law enforcement alike, whilst criminalizing childish behavior. For instance, 9-year-old Patrick Timony was sent to the principal's office and threatened with suspension after school officials discovered that one of his Legos was holding a 2-inch toy gun. David Morales, an 8-year-old Rhode Island student, ran afoul of his school's zero-tolerance policies after he wore a hat to school decorated with an American flag and tiny plastic armor figures in honor of American troops. School officials declared that hat out of bounds because the toy soldiers were carrying miniature guns. A 7-year-old New Jersey boy, described by school officials as a nice kid and a good student, was reported to the police and charged with possessing an imitation firearm after he brought a toy Nerf-style gun to school. The gun shoots soft ping-pong type balls. It is absolutely insane, some of these stories. Another 12-year-old was handcuffed and jailed after he stomped in a puddle, splashing his classmates. Things get even worse when you add the police to the mix. Thanks to a combination of media hype, political pandering and financial incentives, the use of armed police officers, aka school resource officers, to patrol school hallways has risen dramatically in the years since the Columbine school shooting, nearly 20,000 by 2003. What this means, notes Mother Jones, is greater police force involvement in routine discipline matters that principals and parents used to address without involvement from law enforcement officers. As a result, students are not only being ticketed, fined and sent to court for behaviour perceived as defiant, disruptive or disorderly, such as spraying perfume and writing on a desk, but they are also finding themselves subject to police tactics such as handcuffs, leg shackles, tasers and extensive force for acting up. This is absolutely insane. Indeed, as investigative reporter Hazel Vogel points out, this is a very local story everywhere. It's happening in my town, it's happening in your town, it's happening in every school district in America. This is the end product of the so-called school safety policies, which run the gamut from zero-tolerance policies that punish all infractions harshly to surveillance cameras, metal detectors, random searches, drug-sniffing dogs, school-wide lockdowns, active shooter drills and militarized police officers. Schools acting like prisons, school officials acting like wardens, students treated like inmates and punished like hardened criminals. Fear for one's safety has become such a hackneyed and threadbare excuse for behaviour that is inexcusable. These are children here. I can't believe it. Anyway, I'm going to leave the link below. You can read the story yourself. It is quite a long article and it goes into quite some depth. So there you go. Two different approaches to education. I think it's absolutely bizarre that we are arresting children, creating a prison-like environment for education. How can ideas flourish? How can kids possibly concentrate or even get involved in free play when they're completely over-supervised, and any little mistake is going to be treated as a major transgression? And of course, like I say, teaching our kids to play is completely bizarre. We took that for granted. It's just the changing world we live in. Anyway, this is Hound Dog Steve signing off. I hope you enjoyed this little video and some of the information in it. If you did, please like and subscribe below, and we will talk to you real soon. You take care now. You have a great week. See ya. Bye.